was recorded. The first time broadcast has been on since the cyber attack. And my name, you know me, I'm Greg Hammond. I'm House Portfield Chair of this committee. Before we move on with the agenda, I will ask you to join me in 72 seconds silence, please, to remember all those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy of 2017. Chair, thanks very much. Welcome everybody. Members of the public, a member of the public today, and full house from the committee. Anybody have any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Minutes of the previous meeting. I think Sam, you might probably want to raise on those.
Yes, I reading through them. I just wanted our officers to check the record on what if there were any follow-ups or notes from some of the KPI that were presented. We had quite a long discussion about the KPI, which I guess is not being helpful, but I wanted to know on the record who was doing what about it.
Thank you. And Tommy, I think you looked at that for us. And did. Internet decided to go away from it.
Well, we did have a. Do you have some?
Yeah. So okay. So I think from checking at the start, the point was made that pages 46 and 47 could have been removed. That was the point made by the committee. You speak up a bit, please. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Councillor. We checked the notes, and it was recorded in the notes. The members of the committee commented the KPIs in that part of the report could have been improved. That was one point. And the officers responded that they consider how best to present KPI data for future reports.
So is there revised?
I think by email you suggested some revised wording.
Yeah, so the right wording would be members of the committee commented that the environment KPI, environment KPIs and barometrics table, pages 46 and 47 of the report could be improved. Officers responded that they would consider how best to present KPI data in future reports. They also noted that resident satisfaction figures have been compiled following the publication of the report and offered to provide these to the committee. And we could take that final point as an action to chase up and get those resident satisfaction figures circulated.
You satisfied with that?
Yes.
Right. Are there any other comments from anybody else on the minutes? So that's amendments. Is everybody satisfied? Right to sign the minutes.
Agreed.
Agreed. Right to sign the minutes. Okay. We then move on to our substantive papers tonight, and we're considering planning all evening. All four papers, 3 from council and 1 from us. So we're starting with the cyber attack, which is actually says what paper number it is, but anyway, whatever it is, it's the first one, the cyber attack. John, do you wish to introduce that as the lead member, and then go on to Amanda and anybody else that needs to speak?
Yes, thank you, Greg. And I think this is a really important paper. It reflects the position at the points of drafting on our planning systems after the cyber attack, and it's a very fast moving situation. So I'm sure, you know, there will be things that we're working on since that on all
Headphones came out.
after the cyber attack. It's a very fast moving.
Airing yourself,
Nobody likes hearing your own voice back, so that is a special form of torture. So the council has restored some functions, but planning, land charges, and are two of the key ones that remain constrained. And I know we all in this room understand how disruptive that is for people. The impact is really significant, affecting, first of all, people's lives, because people's lives will be on hold, particularly when it comes to things like land charges. I think that's people moving home, potentially delaying milestones in their lives. And then with the planning system, again, applications that are to do with people's homes, with their plans over the medium term, and investment decisions too, so an economic impact. So I think we will be mindful of that. There is a significant backlog of cases that officers are working hard to address, both from a technical perspective and ensuring that we have the resources and workarounds to deal with that over the coming months. I think that backlog is now more than 1,000 cases, so really significant. It is going to be a big piece of work to turn it around once our systems are live again. I'm pleased that we've begun reinstating our pre-application service, and I want to thank officers for the work that they're doing as well, because it's a pretty unique situation to find oneself in as a planner, but more generally across the council as an officer. I'm pleased that we've kept some core functions going. So building control, for example, has maintained a full service throughout the cyber attack. That's really good. But we are all desperate for the system to get live again. Us as members, residents, I know, and also planners, because planners want to be planning, not looking at cyber. So it's a difficult period, but one that we hope to emerge from, and hopefully a silver lining that we can rebuild our systems to a higher standard in the next few months or years, because we know that some of the systems that we've had they're not the best in class, and it would be great to improve.
Thanks very much. Let me bring Amanda in as the report's signed by you to add anything. Also, please let us know what's changed since you signed it off.
Thank you, Chairman. I would start with extending an apology to our residents, our service users, and members. We are all find ourselves in a really difficult position, as Councillor Falasites has explained, and it's a very uncomfortable position for us because we do strive for excellence in terms of service provision, and we are disappointed ourselves that we're not able to meet those high standards for the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. So I do sincerely apologise for the position that we find ourselves in, particularly with reference, as Councillor Falasites has said, in respect of our development management service, including our enforcement and particularly local land charges, which have completely ceased. Fiona is our head of service, and we'll talk you through verbally the updates since this report has drafted, what has changed. We are working hard in terms of trying to bring forward workarounds on those elements that we're able to, but we still do have a way to go. And at this point in time, this evening, we are still not providing the necessary services with specific respect of our planning functions or our local land management functions.
Can we bring Fiona in?
Yes, thank you. So just going bullet point is probably the best way to go through it. So at 2.5, we say that we don't have access to our back office systems. I'm pleased to say we have those in test now, which has given us access to a lot of the documents we were holding. So we're able to do some assessment, find simple things like applicants' details to let them know the situation and what's happening, because we didn't have access to them at one point in time. Unfortunately, we don't have the planning register, but we can see public consultation responses that were submitted before the attack, which is critical. At paragraph 2.6, to give you an idea of the number, that's increased to 640 applications, that have landed with us since. So that adds to the existing casework we had on hand. So we are using those figures to plan our recovery at this point in time. At paragraph 2.8, Councillor Valis has referenced that our free application service has been restored. We've done that with a temporary workaround. So hopefully we can still give people advice, especially those who had taken the time to prepare things for us, you know, before it happened. Paragraph 2.10, we aren't able to convene planning applications committees in their normal way, but we have successfully found a workaround for the business from the 2nd of December committee. And we're working with governance at the moment to hopefully hold our first meeting back on the 17th of February, so that that business can be heard. The letters and things haven't been released yet, but we've told our key residents associations and those involved in the service by email. And finally, with regard to planning enforcement at 212, thankfully we have some of our back office now. So we have our planning records and we're able to progress cases a bit further. We can see what's been granted planning permission and identifying much easier whether there's been a breach, there hasn't been a breach. So progress is being made, but definitely not back to the standard we want.
Thanks very much. We'll turn to the committee to ask any questions. I'll go from that end of the road. Dory, if you want to start.
Thanks. Regarding 210, I wanted to know how's it going in our neighbouring boroughs who I'm not quite sure how much they were affected, because obviously we share a lot of systems, but not everything.
Yes, absolutely. I'll take the question there. So Westminster, we've been having quite regular meetings with to see how they are operating. Their situation is different though. So although we share some functionality, they had their full pre-application service because it was held on in a different way. They had their planning register and back office systems from the start, so they were able to move casework on it again in a different way. We've had a different priority to them in delivering the planning committee decisions that we did back in December. So it's been a different situation, but we're speaking to them directly. We don't actually know what exactly is happening in Handsmith and Philip.
Thanks. And then in 214, if you could explain what threat of designation means. I mean, what is designation?
So in terms of our statutory returns to MHCLG, we report on 3 elements. One is the timeliness of decision making in respect of major applications. Second is timely decision making of non-majors, and then the third is appeals. So basically that measures the quality of decision making, whether or not appeals are dismissed or upheld or otherwise by the planning inspectorate. We do those returns on a quarterly basis, and there are targets in the event of failures in respect of those targets. The Secretary of State may usurp our powers in respect of the determination of certain types of planning applications. It's not a situation that we would ever want to be in, but the consideration of those statutory returns continues across the country, and we are at the moment being supported by PAS, who are supporting us in terms of representations that we may need to make to MHCLG to ask for their consideration of our circumstances.
They must be aware of that.
Yeah, so they are aware, and we did make them aware very early on. But in terms of designation, we're hopeful that consideration will be given to the circumstances when they look at our statistical returns.
That's my final one on this paper is 225. Is it correct that I believe that Accolade is being replaced? Which I'm told is an old system.
Accolade is an old system. It was serving us well, so we were forced to close it. And certainly we will be looking to, as we had intended to anyway, I hasten to add, make sure that the council has a fit purpose system to take us forward. I think the cyber incident has focused our minds and potentially will accelerate that piece of work.
So much.
Thanks, that's Mo.
The information in the plan is sufficient. Thank you.
So in 2.8, does that the first sensory teaching planning advice for request we received prior to 24 November, does that relate to the 650 applications that were mentioned in 2.4?
Yeah, it's to do with the pre-app. No, the 640 are kind of submissions that have come through, planning applications, conditions, formal applications. Our pre-application advice service, you function through our normal website. So there's not pre-apps within that as well. They're dealt with separately. So that's an additional work stream we have running.
And do we have access to all 650 applications, and have we reached out to the residents to make them aware of what is happening?
We have access to the 640. I don't believe we've reached out to every single one. Officers are working through them. The more challenging process of downloading, logging, allocating. It's not done in our usual way. So as we find workarounds, it's slower, but we hope we are getting the message out there as quickly as we can and using other channels as well.
And then for enforcement, do we have an overview of all the cases that were in the system before the cyber attack? And similar question, have you reached out to the residents as to why there was a delay in their cases?
We do now, so that's one of the really good news updates, that we now have access to that back office system. So we have those live. I don't believe we've done a mail out or told everyone about it over and above what the council has done separately with the mail out. But officers have daily contact with complainants and other interested parties on those cases.
Are you planning to do a mail out to all the cases to just explain what is happening?
To be honest, not at this point in time, because it's challenging to draw down from that data because we're working in a kind of test environment. But it's something we can definitely explore.
We're looking to use our front page of our website. In fact, Ms. Lambert has been kind enough to share her ideas with us. So in order to capture as many people as possible, we're hopeful that when we are in a position to do so, we'll use the landing page of our public access web page to update people in terms of that position.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question, and I know it's early in the days, but are we also looking at the future? Because I understand that, for instance, for pre-apps, Westminster were in a better place. Are we learning lessons from that? Are we looking at the future on how are we going to hold our files differently in the future? Are we going to create some backups of existing files at specific times, for instance, so that we could access them if the actual systems are down?
We're considering all of the above. I would say yes. Certainly, in terms of how we work going forwards, there's serious consideration to try to protect us, safeguard us from the impact, to soften that impact should it happen again. And I think I would add to that we're also looking at opportunities to work more efficiently, to make savings to the council where actions or processes didn't serve a useful purpose to our residents. So there are opportunities within this, although it's a negative impact on the service that we sit in at the moment. We are, as part of our workaround work, looking to see what steps going forwards we're able to make in terms of efficiencies, and we'll consult with our lead member on that, and we'll be working with him to test some of those ideas.
Very much, Laura.
Thanks, Chair. Because do we have an idea of when the systems will be back up fully and everything working in fully, or do we have an estimated time?
No question. No is the short answer.
Okay.
We have had indications that there is a possibility that we will have better sight of some of the information that we hold soon, within this month. But we understand that the council is taking a very measured approach in terms of ensuring that our systems are safe, including being supported by external agencies in considering when it's appropriate to switch on our systems. So not wishing to sidestep the question, I'm an end user, and my officers are end users of those systems, and we've got great faith in our colleagues in DDAP team and others that are supporting, who will, I'm sure, let us know when it's appropriate to be able to use those systems. But I'm really sorry, I'm not able to give you a definitive answer.
I was just maybe, that was a maybe.
We're hopeful as soon as possible.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then what plans are in place to reduce any further delays Because obviously everything is working, applications are still coming in, so it's piling up. So what can you just give me a bit more detail about how you're managing that?
Yeah, go on.
Thank you. It's really difficult with planning because the engagement with residents and consultees is so key to our decision making. So that we can't do too much. So what we're doing is downloading the applications, reviewing them, and progressing them as best we can without any tainting of that part of the process. So we're hopeful that when they come back live, people will know their applications are valid and ready to go, have a timeline, and understand what their next steps are. If there are applications which don't require that consultation, they're ones we can progress a bit further, work with colleagues to give an indication of what the interest might be. And now that we have consultation responses for some of those, we have an idea of whether it will need to go to committee or what resident interest there is. So those cases we're better placed to give an informal opinion on. So we're taking every case as far as we can, noting our statutory requirements and the commitments we've made. It's probably the best way to describe it.
Okay, and just on that, so with some of the developments that were sort of underway or maybe under construction, are you prioritising them because they're already they're sort of in limbo? So what happens with them if there's, because obviously they, I'm sure, have deadlines and they're probably quite nervous. So what do you do with that?
Those ones are key. So usually they relate to discharge of condition applications, and quite often they don't require the same public consultation permissions that have been granted. So they're the kind of ones we can try and move on to a degree again. So if people aren't aware of them, so we would still want them to be publicised.
Yeah.
But officers can look at the bricks that they may want to be ordered and go down on the site and have a look. Okay. But it's just a careful balance in making sure we're meeting all the commitments we.
And just do you reach out to them, or do they have to say, hey, we need some info, or are you reaching out to?
At the moment, it's a bit of both.
Okay.
And I think the really key high priority sites where someone is desperate for an answer,
Yeah.
they are already reaching out to us. So we know that, and we're encouraging residents to keep that conversation going with us, especially in this time where we don't have the perfect answer. We're just trying to make as much as we can.
Thank you, Chair. They asked most of my questions, but I still have 3 left. So why has the attack been exactly the same for us, Westminster and Hammersmith, or has it been different? Because it seems like Westminster is not as crippled as we are when it comes to planning. Is that the way we run things? Is it totally different? That's why we are so crippled by what happened? Or has there been, they have been affected less by them? So it's in my head. So if you can explain to me why we are so crippled by this attack, unlike people who have been attacked with us.
2 strands to this, I think.
Mhm.
If I singularly focus on RBKC, in my responsibility as your chief planning officer, I am only able to and only willing to act in accordance with statute and law and policy guidance. And that means that I've had to take a very difficult decision to say we are incapable of discharging our statutory responsibilities. Because that is the truth. We are incapable because we're not able to fulfil our duties. For example, we don't have our planning register available for public consumption on our website, and just one of the very many things. So our system has been switched off for safety reasons as part of the cyber incident. And as a local authority, because we cannot discharge our responsibilities, we also need to consider safeguarding ourselves against successful legal challenge. So it's my responsibility, and I'm accountable in that respect to make sure that I safeguard the council reputationally, and as well as ensuring that we always demonstrate excellence, and that includes abiding by the law. So we're just not in a position to do it. In respect of Westminster, their situation is different to ours, is my understanding.
And I think their response by their teams is different. So they host in a different way the information that we had. They're shut down. They had a different system to Accolade we've heard mentioned. So that's all come into play into what information they lost and had and what systems they use. So there are other things that we are lucky enough to have that they're struggling with. And it works both ways in a sense.
Okay. The other thing is, have we used the time now that we can't really do any planning applications in the usual way we used to do? Have we used that time maybe to do other things, like for instance, focus on enforcement, push them further, make sure they're actually happening? That's one.
I'm really glad for that question. I was going to pick up with Councillor Byrne in that nobody's idle. In fact, we've never been busier. Everybody, it's all hands to the decks at the moment. We're employing workarounds where we can. We're carrying out site visits. We're engaging with our residents and RAs and applicants and agents and trying to make sure that those relationships are honest, and we share with them, what we know, and we do as much as we're able to. A lot of the workarounds that are touched upon in this report and that Fiona has explained are very labour intensive. So parts of the process that would have been momentary in terms of just pressing a button that would have done several parts of the process are now being done manually by individual officers and being stored locally until such time as we can upload them to the system. So we are working hard. We've got lots to do. And we will, when the systems are switched back on, probably be working very differently to try to expedite getting on top of that backlog. So some of the examples being like touch reports, for example, batching reports that are common, getting through applications much faster where there are no objections, for example. So
my final question is, of course, it's got to become people. A lot of people missed deadlines, closing, different things. How much is that going to cost us? And when people start asking us to compensate them for all this loss.
Don't know the answer.
That's
to that.
the part.
We don't have a ballpark figure, no. We again can only at this stage apologise for the inconvenience that this has caused. I do emphasise here that this has been done to the council by an external party. In terms of the costs and the inconvenience, particularly the financial cost, particularly in relation to local land charges, as Councillor has already referenced, I'm sure it is a very, very high figure. The council will simply need to deal with work and queries as they come forward, but we are aware that there are circumstances where people are losing money as a result of this inconvenience.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Good. Well, after 21 questions from my colleagues, I have to create a new one. Hearing that communication is going to be a very big part of all planning officers' jobs, and planning officers are going to have a lot of planning to do as well. Are you working with the comms team, for example, for them to provide full-time people to handle the communications for you? So there'll be lots of people who say, when's it happening, what's the update? And just receiving that sort of quantity of calls will just take all of the time that you have.
So what we're doing now, I'm considering the longer front. So right now, I think people need that sort of personal touch to a degree, because there's so much unknown, and we're being very honest that we don't have any update for them. So we're encouraging officers to, a lot of their time at the moment is actually fielding calls, emails, and letting people know that are reaching out to them. Longer term, that's going to be much more challenging. And longer term, we're going to have some kind of strategy in place so that planners can plan and we can get these decisions out the door. And that's going to be part of the recovery planning we're doing. And I don't know if Amanda has any plans yet.
Yeah, no, we're we've discussed it and, there's not much I can add to that because that's practical. In terms of working with our colleagues in comms, they are supporting us and a horizon scanning in terms of how best to engage and how efficiently to engage with residents and service users. And I will take their expert advice on that. But in terms of the day-to-day work, it's really the priority is managing that workflow, and we will continue to be available to take calls and inquiries from our service users.
Thank you very much, and I realise that these are exceptional circumstances, but Amanda, picking up on your phrase and answer as well as first question, that you're unable to discharge your statutory functions at the moment. Unfortunately, the law is the law, and to what extent are you expecting a deluge of appeals for non-determination, and how are you managing that risk?
I'm not expecting a deluge. We have been able to, for example, you will already be aware, Chairman, that we were able to go to committee in respect of a major application. We applied a lot of thought and diligence and were able to do that comfortably and executing our statutory responsibilities. There is a possibility that appeals will be made. We have had a really good working relationship with PINS during this. They are aware of our situation and have paused their activity until such time as we can participate. So there is that. But in terms of the numbers of people that may or may not choose to appeal, those appeals will be based on the decisions that we make. There will be no failure in our decision making. We will still make sure that any delegated decision or decisions made by our planning committee or PAC are of a high quality. There'll be no slippage there. So the appeals would, as they would have been prior to the cyber incident, based on the outcomes of that decision making process. So,
but am I not right in thinking that you have a statutory timeline to meet the
yes,
make a decision, and if you don't meet that for reasons outside our control, people could appeal,
Yes.
applicants could appeal based on non-determination because
Yes.
you can't determine.
yes. So the applications against non-determination of those applications could be made, certainly.
And so that was really my question.
Yeah.
It wasn't about the quality of the decisions. I'm sure you'll have your usual small failure rate, and it'll be most of them will go through it. But
In answer to your question on numbers, I do not know. Is the straight answer.
and so what are you doing to try and mitigate the risk of getting a deluge of appeals to non-determination?
Well, that comes down to the sharing of information and those communications. And as I said, the strength of our relationships with applicants and service users. We're doing our best to make sure that people are well informed. We are relying on people's patience and understanding in very many cases. And we do recognise that patience is waning in certain circumstances, because there are individuals who are desperate for a decision in respect of their very important applications. But in terms of an answer to your question, I really don't know.
So I appreciate your-
Can I come in on
Yes,
follow up from
please,
that? Because I imagine that if someone does appeal to non-determination, then you cannot, as a planning authority, if all your systems come back on suddenly, you can't just take that back. Once it's been given to PINS as a non-determination, it's out of your hands, which means that the timescale becomes waiting for PINS to, which might be a 6 or 9 month wait. Then they might still could well be much faster, just waiting for the outcome from local teams rather than putting into something where they've lost a little. That's if you come back and look at it.
We would take it on a case by case basis. If the case were one that had public interest, then it's possible that we would still go to committee to demonstrate to PINS the decision that we would have made had we made a decision. But there are various permutations. And as I say, I don't know if there will be any at all. There is a possibility that they will occur, and we would have to follow due process.
Thanks very much. We have one councillor in the room who's not on the committee, Mary, who's sat at the back as quietly. Do you have any questions, Mary?
I don't, but thank you.
And we have one member of the public. Sophia, do you have any questions?
Sorry. First of all, as a mere mortal, I apologise for coming so close to this
No,
table.
you're very welcome.
But I have a real hearing problem.
You're very welcome.
I don't think Amanda really need to have apologised because this was clearly something that was beyond her control. And as far as I can see, the planning officers are doing all they possibly can. There's no doubt that it is causing major problems for developers. I mean, for instance, there are lots of building projects which have been put on hold simply because there are pre-commencement conditions that haven't been agreed. I think, and that there are a few developers who are beginning to say, well, let's just go ahead and hope for the best, which is not a healthy situation. My main concern, and this is something that I emailed Johnny, Councillor Felicitas about this morning, is the many complaints we're getting about the lack of information. The website, the main banner on the front page, you have to get down to FAQs before you find a single sentence saying planning applications cannot now be validated and cannot now be taken forward. People, I gather that regular updates have been sent to planning consultants. That's people like Savills and so forth. And I have to say that we are extremely grateful to Fiona, who has now set up a system of Teams meetings whereby she can update us. And I speak here with both my Ladbroke and my Kensington hats. And that has been extremely useful. But there are so many jobbing architects out there who put in applications. They don't appreciate a lot of the details, like, for instance, you have to do the statutory stuff first. And there's no information for them at all. It surely should be easy enough. The banner on the cyber attack banner is constantly being amended. And I just don't understand why at the next amendment it can't have some additional information on planning, and why there can't be a separate banner on the planning bit of the website, which gives even more detail. I mean, all the stuff in this paper would be extremely helpful to people to know what's going on, and they'd feel then they realise that the council's not behaving in a stupid way. So that's my main plea.
So communication, very useful feedback, and some other comments. Let me ask Johnny and Amanda if they want to come back on any of those points and make some observations.
I don't. I'm grateful. You have shared this with Lisa Chung and I previously, and totally, if we're able to provide more information, then absolutely we will. I think at the time when you first shared your views with us, we were in a situation where we were unable to make changes to the website at that juncture when we first engaged. So certainly, I think they're really sensible suggestions, and if we're able to, put something on that landing page, then absolutely we could. To date, we've been able to give a very kind of one sentence and then a link to the FAQs as you've described. And,
but there's not, you don't even find planning mentioned until you get to FAQs.
Yeah.
So maybe we could help that along, and if the committee was so minded to make a recommendation along those lines, so that so everybody's nodding. So to recommend to the council executive that more information on planning is put on the landing page. Because it's such an important issue. I am going to have to move on to the next paper because we've got 4 papers in quite a quick time. But if you want to run this time, I think we'd agree with you. Tommy can work on the exact wording of it. But we'd agree with the recommendation. But go on to the next point, please, Sophia. No.
I also think that more use could be made of the excellent planning list of RAs. It would be possible to circulate RAs because we take in a lot of people. And we can disseminate information. And so more on that front would be helpful too.
Chair, can I suggest
I'm going to move on now.
to mention Sophia Lambert, Chair of the Ladbroke Association?
Yes, we know.
It should be put in the minutes, otherwise we know, but.
Oh, well, Tommy can.
And I'm a trustee of the Kensington.
Yes.
And that. It's important, and we all know who you are, but the public doesn't.
I'm becoming
If
notorious.
indeed we're allowed to identify by name members of the public in the minutes, which I'm not sure is the point, but we'll leave that constitutional point to Tommy. I'm going to say thank you very much to the panel for the first paper. And I think we're now going to swap over to the second paper. It's probably only Fiona and Ashley swapping over.
Or joining us or that.
Or joining us if you're going to stay on the panel for the second paper, which is on the planning enforcement service. Thank you very much. First paper, and John, you want to introduce planning enforcement?
Yeah, so planning enforcement is an essential part of keeping confidence in the planning and development system. And I think the council does need to act proportionally but firmly where harm is caused. Most breaches are resolved informally, and where developers do ignore rules, we will escalate. As shown, I understand we recently fined won over £200,000 for illegal listed building works. So residents should know that reporting concerns makes a difference, and that reporting them early makes a really big difference. There will, once it's restored, be again an online enforcement form, and people who spot a breach can email myself or a member of the planning department to report. I want enforcement to stay focused on cases that really matter to the public, protecting amenity, heritage, safety, but I also want us to be, as I say, proportionate and pragmatic about how we mete out enforcement. And I welcome the work that officers are doing to clear the backlog and strengthen communication. I think it is an area where we could probably strengthen over the coming months and years. I think there are times when residents want and members too more timely updates and a quicker pace of work in terms of planning enforcement. That's something that I've heard from colleagues and from residents and want to see us make more progress with.
Very much, Amanda.
Nothing to add.
Right, so is there any other ways? Sam, your chance to ask
I'll get my
questions.
So it won't be large. Just a couple of it's very useful, and ward councillors often have an interesting angle on some of these things. I used to go through the list for my ward, or not with with the enforcement officers, and could help prioritise or to point out where something was no longer needed to follow up. And on some occasions, we were able to help agree and knock out a third of the cases. So the focus was on the most important examples. So that's a point which is, when you come to everyone's very busy, use the councillors who are in touch with a range of people, and it could be that helps prioritise. It's another view of what you could or couldn't find. The second is there are a lot of statistics in this paper, and I'm not going to go through them all now, but I'm sure that other colleagues will have questions about them. But how is enforcement? Does enforcement ever have these figures reported in any other way, or is it only through this committee? Do they have to be published in some way? Are they discussed at any sort of planning committee type thing, or is it through school?
These figures are published in the AMR, the annual monitoring report.
Yeah, we report notices to MHCLG, a number of notices, and then we have it's more internal scrutiny by our executive team, who would see case closures and we report our KPIs to them as well.
So KPIs are something that probably I've been on the committee for that long, probably something that can come in a paper like this on some basis. But there's also does the government department publish its own summary, or is it just for their internal use?
It's only for internal use. I only believe we report the actual action that's taken, notices served, and within the annual monitoring report.
Yeah, we provide quarterly figures to MHCLG about certain notices that the government requires. Not all formal notices, but most of them, but it's within their guidelines.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question that I've been asked quite a few times by residents. When an enforcement is given and something is supposed to be removed or changed, how long from the time it is done to actually physically see the change? Because we have an incident where it's not even in my ward, it's just next door, but it's people still come back to me about it. I know for a fact that a decision has been made and they've been asked to remove it, but nothing moved.
It's a really good question. Things do take a long time, so our investigations aren't quick anyway. And then in almost all circumstances, there's a right of appeal. And those appeals for planning enforcement matters are notoriously, and those figures are published online, how long they take. And it can be months before a planning inspectorate comes to view and determine an application. And then at that point, if our notice is upheld and they agree with us and action can be taken, there is a compliance period for them to get rid of whatever it is. So all of that takes time. And then in the event someone doesn't do what they are asked to do, we then have a prosecution process.
Okay.
So there is, they can be really lengthy and challenging, which is why the report explains we get most success from the informal action, the informal route, and encouraging people to resolve it before it gets to any of those, worst stages.
Thank you.
Laura.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, a couple questions. Kind of on that, is there like a time limit if it goes to appeal and stuff, or what is the time limit actually for the example that?
I mean, there's no limit. There's no time limit. Once we serve a notice, we won't accidentally by default allow something to stay in place, because there's certain rules time limiting how long we can take action for. The notice stops that in its tracks. The problem is it's the process after that's out of our control, and it's really difficult to actually even update residents on where we are in that process, because it's with a separate party. We try and keep them updated on the fact that we don't have a decision or when we expect decisions based on the data that PIN's published. But it can be months.
And then also you have a backlog of enforcement cases. What's your time frame for sort of improving it? And are you getting a lot more coming, so it just keeps building, or are you actually weaving through? I noticed that there's like higher kind of caseloads for officers, it seems, than whatever. But anyway, but yeah, so I digress. But so yeah, is it improving? Are you getting through that backlog? And is there a time frame where we'll be at like a normal range or a low range?
I would say we are chipping away at the backlog. It's definitely not a quick process. So year on year, I think the results are showing a great number of closures, notices and improvements there. But we have had a decline in the number of staff within the team, which has to adjust how we're performing. But we are, for this year, have a real focus on recruitment and resourcing in the enforcement team, and we have support for that. So we're hoping we will make that chipping away at the backlog more successful.
Okay. And obviously it generates income for the council. Not that I want anyone to pay particularly more, but if it is costing more to get something done, can you recover any more costs from? Is there anywhere else you can recover those costs? Because if people aren't complying and they're just dragging it out, obviously that costs more money. So is there anything else, anywhere else that could it be increased, maybe the fines or whatever?
They're not set by us, and the cost recovery for enforcement is actually quite limited. I know we've included information there about the proceeds of crime and our successful prosecution.
Yeah.
But the money we actually see that goes directly into the enforcement team is relatively limited. So I don't think it will ever be an income generating service or something like that, unfortunately. But so we just need to do more with less, and we think that by improving efficiencies within our team and actually having more people that can actually assist us in getting better outcomes for residents and being more efficient overall, that's our plan.
And just one more thing, and then I'm done. So there seems to be quite a few sort of non-compliant, notices that are not compliant with. Is there a way that we can sort of work with residents or to help them not get to that stage in the first place? How can we do that? How can we bridge that gap? Because I feel like maybe it is communication. I don't know. I'm sure there are some people that just want to do what they want to do, but maybe there are some people that just don't quite know that they may be doing something not quite right. So what can we do to kind of engage with the public so we don't have so many cases in the first place? That was longly worded, but you know what I mean.
And we have got 4 pages to go, so.
Sorry.
Remind yourself, be snappy with your question.
Yeah, I'll be really succinct. Uniquely, RBKC provides a pre-planning service on the telephone, Monday to Friday, 5 days a week. And it's a really useful and free resource for our residents or whomever to get informal advice, and hopefully they use that service. And I know it is very well used.
How do they know about it? How can they know about it?
So just contact us. It's on our website. We're always there. The telephone is always answered, and you can get some free advice or point you in the right direction. I hasten to add, of course, planning enforcement is not an income generating service.
Yeah, I know, but it would be at least you could pay yourself a bit more.
We're moving on to.
Yes, thanks.
Yes, Tim.
Question on the timeframes for enforcement. I understand and appreciate that it is a time-consuming process, but do you feel confident that the communication with complainants is sufficient? Because just to give an example, in my ward, in Street Postcourt Gardens, over the past 4 years, lots of residents have consistently complained to me about the air conditioning units of the hotels from the back of their homes, of the hotels on Barkston Gardens. I think that problem has now subsided, but it has taken a long time, as you mentioned. But in those 4 years, I have never felt that residents understood the process of enforcement and how long it took. So I don't think comms are telling people this is the process, this is where we are in the process, this is when the planning inspector will be visiting, etc. I don't think residents have any view of that.
I think we definitely have room for improvement, and I think actually as the new team leader of the planning enforcement team would also agree, and actually served as a case officer. So I definitely think we can do some work around how we improve communication and keep people up to date, even if there is no update, and it's a case of waiting. So we are well aware of that. Members have communicated that to us, and we've had resident feedback that is very, very similar.
So, and I appreciate with the cyber attack, everything is up in the air at the moment. But are you planning to do that improvement, and what's the timeframes around the improvement process?
Yeah, I think within the paper we identify the gaps in resource that we intend to fill, and we have got a new pathway to planning graduate come in. So we're hoping to see an upturn now. But realistically, when we are fully stocked within that team in the next 3 to 6 months, we really hope there will be an upturn in that service delivery.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. How do you deal with when a resident may make a complaint or inform you about that planning breach? What's the process?
The first steps we would do would be to maybe we need to ask some questions to the resident about when did the development occur. Could you send photos? Would you like us to come and visit to see it from your view? We would search the planning history. It's all a very fluid investigation with different routes. So it could be the case where we can clearly see it's got planning permission, and then we would back to the resident and say it's case closed. Have you got any concerns? It could be that it's permitted development. It could be that it doesn't require planning permission, and we would signpost the resident to a different service, such as an older air conditioning unit that's making a noise, that could be noise and nuisance. It's all a very fluid process. So there's no.
We have lots of active associations, active associations, and good residents who are working with the council hand in hand. And how could we improve? We are relying on those associations while we are working with the council. How could we improve since we have a gap in the website now? Do you have any ideas how to encourage residents to give you more information? Do you have any idea how to improve that?
It's a good point because we completely rely on our residents to bolster that service, and a lot of the action we take in the unauthorised development we know about comes from residents. There are eyes and ears as described in this paper. So it's something we can actually take away to see if there's any way of, I don't know, just improving that and encouraging it.
The online form that we usually have pre-cyber incident is very good at asking for prompts. So when does the development take place? How do you think it, how is it affecting you? What would you like to see as a resolution? Can you provide photographs? At the minute, we don't have that, so it's all kind of email based. But officers are still trying to front load the process by asking those questions and filling in the gaps from an early stage. So the online form is quite good.
Does that include breaches, planning breaches?
Yes, it's for them. It's to report planning breaches.
Very much so, Dory. Thanks. Just one question really on this one. Paragraph 4:10 and stuff 4:11. If one team leader goes, how come it seems to cause so much turbulence in the team or the department?
It was we had an unsuccessful round of recruitment originally for the team leader post that then left a gap, and that was the start of it. But we're really hopeful that now that we have a team leader in place permanently with knowledge of the borough, experience at all levels of enforcement, that we are in a really good position going forward. But it was a turbulent time.
There's only one person left. So,
Well, I think it was a combination of people. So we had that another staff member, I think it refers to, and a couple of other vacancies within the team, and it all came to a head at the same time. But
where it's written suggests one person left. Anyway, and then it mentions, yes, and several officers on an interim basis and so on and so on.
That
wasn't it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dory. That was a very important subject indeed, and actually no help hears from me about my cases in my ward. So and I face quite regularly with things. So just a few questions from me. 4.7. Before we get the list, actually goes on to the second page. It is the bullets metrics about what you would like to do, like technology complaints allocated into a case officer to patrols and so on. Unless I've missed it, it doesn't say in the paper how well you're doing against those different metrics and bullet points. Is that information available? Where is that information available? And can you provide it to the committee, please?
It isn't available at present due to the read-only version of.
So would it be available if we had access to the database?
I can certainly check our business analysis how easy it is to extract the data.
I mean, is it normally available, that data? I mean, when you have the systems working normally.
I'm not sure. We don't.
If you don't know, we can take it away.
I think better answer that one in writing afterwards. I'm quite happy to give an answer. And if you can't give me the answer to the questions because you don't have the data available to you right now, that's understandable. Perhaps we'll just put that on the committee's list for when cyber incident is when you've got access to your data again, please to give us the data behind paragraph 4.7 about form. 4.13 then. Just so right, if I'm understanding that correctly, you are building up a backlog every year, and so let's say you're closing fewer cases than you're being open every year until 24, 25, and the backlog's increasing year by year. Am I reading that correctly? And then you turn it around into by 158. So you've got a surplus of cases opened against cases closed 318 in 2021, which is the first pandemic year, 38 the next year, then 36, then 74, and then in 24, 25, you close 158 more cases than are open. So this is the backlog developing and continuing to develop.
Yeah, until 24, 25.
when you start to turn it around.
Yeah.
But presumably there's a backlog going back before 2020. Maybe there is.
Maybe a small amount.
And what's the size of the backlog as of today's date?
Today's date, it
Might be in
is,
the paper, so.
I think it's 269 that are older than 16 weeks old, is the figure we've included.
Okay.
Um,
And so 260, oh yes, there it is, where 269 is the backlog plus the live cases that are within the timeline. Okay. And then, I think I must be quite shocked by this 4.43. Am I actually reading this right? So the first essentially, the first table in there is number of formal notices served. Next one is the number of formal notices complied with, and the compliance rate is shockingly low: 24%, 4%, and that's the pandemic year, 39%, 28%, 23%, 7%. Is that really as bad as that, or have I completely understood the paper?
We're improving the way we record notices complied with, so that's the formal answer, but within the system, figures should be high. Yeah. Because, yeah, I do appreciate there is a gap between.
So what am I looking at here? So notice is served, and obviously some of them the people do comply 100%, and some of them they ignore you altogether. According to this, like the last full financial year, 7% lied, and that means 93% ignored you. But if I've read that correctly.
Yeah, I mean, those figures aren't correct. Well, the last year's figure, 74 notices served, 24, 25, that includes an additional type of notice which isn't complied with, it's just transformative. So there's the different ways of decoding towards the end.
Okay, so I'm now completely confused by that.
I think we need to get some more data on the notices complied with, because I think that.
I think we do. We need
Yeah.
to have some assurance that when you issue notice that the majority of people do comply with it. Of course, I hope the majority do comply. I realise that some don't. Of course, that's life. You have to take formal action with them.
And that isn't the norm. I mean, it's the majority of enforcement agents are complied with, because we don't prosecute many cases. But yeah, I think we need to explore why that number is showing us so low.
Yeah, perhaps produce some updated data to expand on that point. The last thing I was going to comment on really was 420. It was short-term letting. And I know we were doing, I was involved in what might have been a test case before the pandemic on enforcing short-term letting. Unfortunately, couldn't get to court because both the alleged perpetrators pulled out and before their individual cases got to court in the same street. But I'm wondering whether effort seems to have stalled, perhaps because of Bill Manning. What's your plans to increase the enforcement?
Yeah, short-term letting cases are very resource intensive for officers.
Very important for residents.
They're very important for residents, and we do prioritise them because they do cause harms to residential amenity. Through the summer, with our previous pathways to planning student, we prioritised cases within his workload for short-term letting, and it worked really well. We were able to target investigations quicker. We were able to carry out more thorough investigations than we were previously. They were able to a lot of the resolutions were negotiations with the owners of the properties. A lot of the time owners don't know what's taking place, that they're not aware of these allegations, and once they're aware of the allegations and the council communicates to them, they go through separate channels to evict
their tenancy with the short-term letting. So there was quite a good. It worked out quite well to informally see resolutions quite quickly. So that's something. Hopefully, we've exhausted this year. Hopefully, we can really have a good go at that again and get results.
Well, maybe if the committee was so minded, we could encourage you with the recommendations to resume your efforts on it. Would the committee be agreeable to a formal recommendation from us to the council executive to increase your efforts on short-term letting, please? Sounds good. Thank you very much. Now, Mary.
I had a quick question actually on paragraph 420. And I wondered if it was an area, because like the chairman, my residents also find this a matter of real concern, all of the problems it causes. Whether this was a classic case where AI actually might help us to triangulate data, and also whether we empower residents by giving them instructions about how they can help us by gathering data that would actually be useful and stand up in any proceedings, and do we advertise that?
Yes, we do. We buy into a service where it triangulates the data from the larger booking platforms, so Airbnb, Booking.com, few more of them, and it triangulates the data for occupation per month, so we get monthly updates on that. That's a really useful system, and we do ask residents and complainants to give them a look, because it can be really useful and it really strengthens our case if the were to serve a notice.
I was also thinking about triangulating with rubbish data and that sort of data, which we also capture. In order, if stuff's being consistently dumped outside the property, that's often a sign that it's being short-term there. But it's good to hear that all that stuff's going on.
We work closely with the waste management team, noise and nuisance, and we all kind of share complaints. So where the waste management team are noticing more commercial type of waste or heavier amount of residential waste, yeah, we work closely with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Sophia, do you have any questions for Planning?
It was just to say that the Ladbroke Association is quite a source of minor complaints about minor breaches, and generally, until these staffing problems, we found the enforcement section extremely efficient and expeditious in dealing with them. In reply to Councillor Bhatia on the question of education, he and the Ladbroke Association share the Portobello Road, which is, of course, a source of constant problems, because businesses seem to go bust within about 3 years. A new person comes in, they don't know they need to have planning permission to change their shop front, and so we're having endless problems. And that is something where I think some education could be done. I mean, I've been thinking whether I shouldn't go around all the main landlords and produce some sort of sheet for them, but this is something that I think is.
I will go with you.
Thank you very much. I think that was more of a comment, but if any of the panel wants to come back on anything that said that. Okay. Well, thank you very much for putting that in, and thank you to officers producing the paper. We move on to our third paper. It's my fault that we've got 3 papers because I put the cyber attack paper in and I feel that we it's not to consider that. I didn't talk about that. And it does mean we have the third paper that's 22/8 already, and Chris has joined us at the table. Ashley's leaving. Thank you very much, Ashley. John, would you like to introduce the planning reform paper?
Yes. So these are some of the biggest changes to the planning system that we've seen in a long time, but much of it and how it play out is still unclear. We wait to see what the government will bring forward, particularly in terms of how committees will work in the future. The proposed 2-tier system, which means that most small, medium schemes and things like basements, they can have a really big local impact as we've seen as a borough, will be decided by officers, does raise questions about local democracy. And I know that members in this room greatly value the contribution made by residents and residents associations in terms of how we assess schemes and the benefits and how they bring. Capping planning committees at 5 members and having a gateway test for what reaches committee could also reduce the role of elected councillors in the planning process. So that's quite significant, particularly for those of us who are elected members. I think I want to see a system that speeds up decision making without sidelining local accountability. So that means involving members and residents in the process. And in our borough, keeping up the really high standards we do have in design and heritage and construction management, whilst enabling growth, which we need to see. We need new homes, new offices, and we want vibrant high streets and mixed communities. So that's the summary.
All right, members?
Nothing to add.
Thanks very much. So we'll go around the other way again. So Doris, turn first, please.
Thanks. I have to tell you, I've got quite a lot, so I won't put them all.
Well, you do
Need
all,
some for us.
also all in one go, please.
All in one go?
So we're going to have questions all in one go this time around. So
All right.
Or we can answer in writing if there are a large number.
No, probably, sorry, I just lost the page, because there's no page numbers in this document. All right. I suppose the overall question is, after all this, what's coming here about national rules-based plans, when's there a plan for a local plan? I mean, it is mentioned, but I'm just wondering. Regarding, looking at the summary, the edit of summary, if it's all national rules, what about the heritage areas? And that's not just Kensington and Chelsea, it's Salisbury, it's Chester, it's etc.
It's mostly Kensington and Chelsea.
I mean, we've got Article 4 erections in a lot of the borough because of a previous attempt to have a national policy and can't have one. So that's on the table. Regarding mandatory training, I guess because it's certified, I guess we don't do that. Because I remember having to go through 3 things before I got on the planning committee. So, okay, then 4.6, in item 4.6, about plan making and decision making. I'm not quite sure what the difference, why there's a difference, so perhaps you can briefly elucidate. Okay, well, just on paragraph 9, integrated nest boxes for birds. I think that was a nitty-gritty government interference in line of things, but that's something else. Well, that's that. Even though so I've just made some notes for myself. That's all right.
if you've got, haven't got the questions ready, I can.
Coming, yeah, I have. I'm just going through them. It's just I also notes to myself, not to ask. Right, and going through to the survey, the technology consultation. On question 12, I'm just curious. It says maximum for planning committee with 11 members. Does that mean the pool or 11 sitting at a subcommittee, as it were, sitting there? 11 of them. We only do 5. What does that mean? Do we know? That's a question. And actually, and on 19, there appears to be no response. Is there anything that can be done to mitigate any impact identified? Not even an NA. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dory. Let's have some commentary back from the member and director. Pretty constructive as well.
Sure, we can take heritage areas first. Yeah, so I think the first question was what goes in local plans, given we've got national rules-based policies. So the scope, yes, for local plan trusting very much defined what should and shouldn't go into local plans. But one of the things in terms of heritage that they do say is consideration of local lists of heritage assets in addition to the national list. So they are not diminishing the role of local plans in that regard. So we already have policies which are used to determine planning applications in the NPPF. But what they've done is they've structured them in a more cohesive way now, where they would still apply as they do currently, but just with policy reference numbers, with more clarity, and also perhaps more kind of clarity on the weight that should be given. So they've redefined how you apply those policies whilst determining planning applications. But I think in terms of local plans, we would still be able to specify our own locally defined policies on local issues.
there are other things in the consultation where, for example, on the energy side of things, so that is something the government is keen to curtail, that we shouldn't be asking for net zero carbon development in our local plans because they want a consistent standard that meets building regulations across the entire country. So I think that there are some things, but there are other things which we can still cover in our local plans. I think that was your first question. In terms of the difference between plan making and decision making policies, so the plan making policies apply to when we are producing our own local plan, and they're specifically just for that purpose. One of the paragraphs in the NPPF makes it very clear that in decision making for planning applications, we shouldn't be applying the plan making policies. So they have different reference numbers, different headings for plan making policies under each section of the NPPF, and then the decision making policies, so decision making policies, I should also add, they come into immediate effect as soon as the NPPF comes into force. So that means when our development management team is determining planning applications, they will start applying those policies with immediate effect. Where the local plan policies are in any way in conflict with those national DM policies, it's the national policies which will then take precedence.
Right. But actually, a decision in the planning application, for a planning application, depends on local plan and national plan. So what you're saying is, if there's no conflict, local plan will apply.
Yes, if there is no conflict, I think both the policies will apply. We will have more detailed policies if they will continue to apply as they do now. But if there's a conflict, which there would be a conflict in terms of our net zero policy, so it will be the national policies that will.
Thanks very much. Please, thanks.
The two-tier system is something new, as you, Councillor Al-Sidi mentioned. I'm not clear about the tier 1, tier A, which says 10 units or less. At the moment, whenever we have an application, if we had 3 or more residents objecting to this will automatically come to the committee for consideration. But by applying this, I try to say, by applying the new law, we are taking this from our residents. They no longer have a say to object, apart from contacting the local councillor who can call in the application.
That's correct, and that would be one of the impacts of the Labour government proposed planning reforms that would be imposed on residents in Kensington and Chelsea.
Okay, consultation is another thing. At the moment, I want to understand about this. Are we legally required to consult affected neighbours whenever there is an application, no matter big or small? If that's yes, what's the new law? Would the residents still have a say about any future developments?
Yeah, we would still consult, certainly, yes.
They would be consulted, but the circumstances in which they come to committee would be many fewer. It would be much rarer for things to come to committee.
The vast majority of applications would be determined at officer level under delegated authority. And a small amount of applications that fall within the larger classification in terms of the number of homes would be determined by committee.
Okay, if the officers are determining the application, are they legally required to consult?
We would still consult, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Chair, there were a couple of other questions.
Yeah, I'm moving on, but this is in the interest of time. So
The report was very comprehensive. I didn't have any questions.
thank you, Tim. Laura.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple. How will I know you touched on it that if the local plan doesn't marry up with the national plan, then the national plan goes ahead. Is there any way to dispute that if we really, argue that? If there was a case in particular, could we make that a special exception? Would they be able to somewhere, and how?
So I think the first thing to say is this is a consultation at this stage, the NPPF, so we would be responding to that consultation. And I think I've flagged in this report certain areas which particularly we are likely to be concerned about. So we would be raising those comments when we respond. So for instance, in paragraph 410(5), it talks about streamlining local standards, and in the last sentence, I mentioned that it's being stated that local plans should not cover matters relating to the construction of buildings. So that is clearly something which over a number of years we've developed robust policies where we also have a code of construction which we condition. We've got policies on basements where we require construction method statements, etc. So I think those are things that we would definitely provide a very robust response on. And it's quite possible that the government hasn't, because this is policy being set at a national level. They may not realize some of the inadvertent effects of setting national policies in that way. But I think, another question that has also come to my mind is that these national policies are not being introduced on a statutory basis. So legally, it's still the local plan, which is the document against which planning applications must be determined. So I think that just throws a sort of legal question. So although the government has said that as soon as the NPPF comes into force, it trumps local policies where they are in conflict, but legally is that, how that plays out in practice, I think that remains to be seen.
Just sort of following up and a bit of an extra question. So how prepared is the council and officers with being able to manage this new? Are they ready for the new system? And having the authority to actually go against the grain if they're not happy with it?
Yeah, so I have so in the policy team we have undertaken an assessment and internal assessment of how the policies in the local plan, which is relatively new, adopted only in July 2024, which of those policies may conflict. So I think I pointed out the energy policy would be one, but I think largely the local plan does comply with most of what's coming out in the NPPF. Other than some of the areas where, for example, on the affordable housing, there's another proposal that they're looking at perhaps taking payments in lieu for sites which are 10 to 49 homes, which is a new classification of sites, medium sites that's being introduced. So I think, we'll just have to see where, so we would be very prepared. We don't know exactly when this will be in place, other than the fact that it will be sometime this year. But when it does come in, we would have a clear idea of which policies do or do not comply. We would have internal training for DM officers as well. So I think we would be prepared to implement those, and also understand how, what the impacts might be locally.
I think it's also noteworthy that where precedence is found in terms of the new NPPF, there may be requirements for us to review our constitution. For example, in terms of delegation or otherwise.
I'm going to talk with my president's hat on as opposed to my council hat. The president's main concern is in occasions, officers were here and councillors were there. So there is a huge gap between what the officers think is actually material and should be considered and should be acceptable, because on paper it fits the bill. But when it comes to residents, it doesn't work for the environment they live in, they enjoy, and they call home. How are we going to mitigate that and make sure that officers now will have the power to decide most applications are in line with residents 100%?
I think that goes back to the point that Councillor Van-Fleet has made at the top in terms of the introduction and the sentiment in respect of what this could be perceived as being. So, for example, more applications being determined under delegated authority, under my authority as Director of Service. In all cases now and in the future, we make sure that we present the most informed professional view that we are able to. That includes reports that are presented to committee, and in the very rare occasion that the committee resolves differently against an officer recommendation, those decisions stand and we respect them as an officer group, and we respect the council's position. So yes, I do recognise that there is a difference in terms of the system going forwards, and that it could be perceived as being that it comprises excluding factors in terms of resident participation. But I am only an officer, and the government has determined that this is a way forward, and as has been said, it's a really radical change, and it's recognised by this council that things are likely to be very different, and it will potentially include areas where there is dissatisfaction. I think I can offer you this comfort as your Director of Planning, that in terms of the consultation document, for example, it provided me an opportunity to discuss with the chairman of Planning Committee or Planning Applications Committee, and in cases, for example, where there is a public interest or where I am able to set aside my delegated authority, I do it now, for example, and I am the chairman or chairperson in whichever event. I'm invited to reach a consensus in that. My relationship with the chairman of both has always been excellent. And without exception, there's never been an occasion where we've resolved a conversation in disagreement. So I'm looking to the council to continue to support me in doing my work as best as I can, and that includes giving consideration to the representations made by our residents.
Very much so. Just taking that in, that's a very interesting statement. Two things. First is, have you discussed any of this informally with changes to planning committee and planning decision making with your fellow planning council leads in London? And is there a sense that it's happening exactly as the consultation questions look? Because obviously most things don't change the answers of what ministers want to do. So is there a sense from your colleagues across other London councils that this policy is a goer, or is it going to get changed like lots of other policies?
It is correct that I'm a member of the Planning Officer Society, so I do meet with my peers regularly, and POS did make a representation of its own, and our representative, RBKC's, is appended to your pack. We are aware that primary legislation has been laid, and there will be consultation, and secondary legislation would be necessary to bring any of this into effect or force. So yes, in terms of me and my peers, we are of the opinion, or I should only speak for myself, that it is likely that there will be implementation of change by this government.
Second question, when there are consultation papers, I know you work, or your team works with the lead member, and this may be a question to the chairman as well. What role, if any, and if time constraints allow, should this scrutiny committee have in seeing a draft response to the consultation?
We always share them. Sorry.
No, I think we shared it with some of them with the chairman of the committee in advance of submission.
So, for example, this one is radical and important, and in terms of an explanation, so you're best informed.
It comes to us as a submitted paper.
That hasn't been submitted yet. No.
Right.
The response on the NPPF, I think March, is it March?
Yeah.
March,
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one I know has come like this, but was the previous one submitted in draft? I don't remember seeing it, but
It did go to the GLA and the MNCLG consultations were shared.
They were shared with the chairman of the planning committee and I think with the sub-chairman in advance.
I don't specifically remember, but I'm not going to say they were.
yeah, the question was, there seem to be a number of different routes where a draft consultation might go to the lead member, it might go to some form of group, it might go to the chairman of the planning committee, it might get shared like that, or it might come to this committee. So the question is there for this committee, this is me asking the chairman the question, for this committee, is there a sort of a more formal procedure for it to come to the people on this committee? Or you can choose case by case basis, that's also very good answer.
We only have certain, I'm not going to go evidence, of course, so that's side of the table, but I think we probably do have to take it on a case by case basis, and we only have so much space in our agenda, including one meeting tonight dedicated to planning. But I think we always sort of welcome as a whole committee distribution of things. If you want our opinion on things, we're available to, we may choose to reply or not.
Any other questions?
I share the concerns you laid out at the beginning, Johnny. I think this looks like a bit of a one-size-fits-all approach from the government that doesn't necessarily fit our local situation. I think I have sort of concerns about 2013, where we're losing or potentially losing public housing facilities. I have a concern, which Preeti mentioned, about present construction practice. Really important for our residents in the high density area is Kensington, Chelsea. I'm concerned about the loss of our important SPTs like the basement policy and the fact fell away. So I mean I don't know that you can answer that because of course this isn't implemented yet. But I just put on record my concerns, but we can come back to them on that if he wishes. My question is when the new NPF appears in its finalised form, to what extent will that require us to create a new local plan earlier than we otherwise would have done? Is it that Preeti, but perhaps you can expand on that, Charles?
I'm interested to come back on that first part. I share your concerns.
Thank you.
Yes, so I think, as I said, it will depend on how much of a conflict there is for our policies. But yes, I think because we have a relatively recent local plan, and largely my reading is that policies would comply with the new NPPF. I think the concern might be that we would want our supplementary planning documents because they will cease to have great effect once all of this is in place, that we may actually wish to put some of that really useful guidance into a new local plan. So I think we would probably want the new system to come in properly and then launch a review. We've also, I know we've got the local plan working group paper, which is next on the agenda. I think there are those policies as well. So we haven't decided a timeline for it, but yeah, I think we would probably want to commence sooner rather than later once the new system comes into there.
Right, let me turn to Mary, who's back.
No, nothing for me, thank you.
Next, Sophia.
Yes, we haven't yet simulated all these documents, but we will be putting in. We are concerned about the loss of the ability to take household applications to committee. So we welcome what Amanda has said. Although actually, when they do go to committee, I think about 80 or 90%, the officer's advice is followed. The chief benefit is that changes are made, which goes some way to satisfy people. And I am giving some thought to some sort of alternative informal system, which I'd welcome a discussion with Amanda, whereby the officer's report could be recirculated before the delegated decision is taken, with possibly some sort of negotiation. But I just offer that as something that's worth thinking about, because it could be done informally. We will also be arguing to the government that the regulations should give as much wiggle room as possible to allow members to look at applications.
I almost think the government's got it 180 out, but the councillors add most value on the smaller things, on the neighbourhood things that Mrs. Miggins' basement, where they can deploy local knowledge. It's actually the big strategic ones where they're like the councils where the NPPF is going to override anything that the councillors decides. Almost, if you were going to give delegated powers, I would do it the other way around for the bigger ones, and leave the councillors to make decisions on the smaller ones where they can arbitrate between local interests using that local knowledge. But that's personal comment, not from me as chair of the committee, and we will be told what we're going to do by the government when they're seeing the consultation. I'm not very optimistic about it, but it is what it is. I think we need to, and I apologise for the time if not all members got all their questions in. Please feel free to put in Dory, particularly put in written questions if there's anything else you want to add. But I think as a committee, because this is still a developing piece, these are still consultations that are going in.
It was just a final point of clarification on one of Councillor Smething's questions, where he said that mandatory training isn't provided at present for our planning committees. It absolutely is.
It's some sort of training.
I assure you.
I said we had training, but it just wasn't certified.
Ah, okay.
Yes, I suppose it's the certificate.
I just wanted to absolutely.
So summarising my points, because this is developing, because we've got one consultation that's being considered by the government, another one that responses haven't even gone in yet. I think as a committee we're going to have to return to this in a year or so to wishing to find my successors if we're no longer here as a team in a year's time, but whoever's sitting in these seats will need to return to the subject and scrutinise again where we've got to and what we're going to do. But it was a useful paper, and thank you very much, Paul planning team, for your and Johnny for your efforts in putting 3 very good papers to us tonight. We're going to go on to our final paper, which is our paper, but you're very welcome to sit and listen to that if you wish to.
Our 4th very good paper of the evening, working group recommendation. So this came about because members and lead members at the time were throwing around ideas about what needed more thought or consideration, what changes could be made to the local plan, and a lot of topics were thrown into the mix, and the working group worked through them with the help of expert officers, and the conclusions or recommendations for the committee to think about tonight. And Sophia has heard all of this because she came to the meeting where this was discussed with residents groups who also had a chance to input on all of these. It's on page 5 of the report, 5 and 6. I would very briefly say, in most cases, it was decided that there wasn't the evidence or grounds to make changes to the plan, and in some cases, maybe I'll just pick out the ones where existing policy did need some further thought and development. And so existing buildings, the lead member recommending reviews the policy on roof alterations and additional stories, as it may be overly restricted in upward extensions. But we also know that there are lots of changes in other legislation coming through, and therefore it's got to be taken in the round. Also, wording for mixed-use residential development in employment zones, BC1. Again, asking the lead member to review the wording of some parts of policy, help make sure that optimal use is made of the land. A lot of this is practical and by negotiation anyway, but the policy does seem to be one step behind what's actually happening. No amendments on hotels. There is a recommendation on car parking, but in the future, the select committee reviews data on parking use and trends. Contaminated land, there is something here. There's concern that contaminated land is a very interesting topic, and we learnt a huge amount in the working group just now's presentation, but it wasn't necessarily the correct way to use planning policy to implement some of the contamination regulations. And so that we're asking to be looked at how that policy is implemented. Listed buildings, we're missing the quarterly review of planning decisions, planning inspector decisions. See, was very helpful in informing planning committee to the extent it still exist in whether its decisions were right or not, but also very helpful for officers because the overturn rate on listed buildings is higher for officer decision than for planning committee decisions. And those quarterly reports, if they could be resumed again, were very useful so that we can learn from what opinions are saying. That's it.
Very much indeed. So questions for the January working group from members of the committee, if any? Well,
I have a question on number 9 about the amalgamations. I thought in the past, if we had two really puny units, we can amalgamate them and have a decent flux. But saying here, you are avoiding amalgamations.
Where we got to,
All
where we got to on it is that we had to provide, and there was a very big debate that Bridget can probably add some of the techno detail to, a very big debate about what sort of evidence we would have to produce, real evidence, to be able to start to reverse the recently decided local plan that was evidence-based and went through examination. And we found that we looked for, through help from officers as well, we looked for any sources of evidence that could be looked at that would indicate that we had an evidence base to move to recommend a change. So whether or not people liked the policy or not, what was the evidence level to suggest we could actually recommend making a change, and we couldn't find evidence.
I won't bring Tracy in, because it sounds report. So
Because it to me, it sounds like we're concerned by the numbers, how many units, as opposed to the quality of the unit.
Yeah, that's exactly the question we asked and debated. What measures could we find that could indicate the quality of people's experience of the homes that would enable us to effectively make changes to the local plan and get them through? Because this was not, do we like the policy? It's what can you do about the local plan that you've got, and that's where we failed to find evidence or quality or any evidence of the numbers that would enable us to argue against the recently enacted plan. So we share your aggravation. That's why it's on the topic in the first place. Yeah.
Just can I pick up on that one as well? To what extent did you consider heritage factors as part of that decision making process in coming to a recommendation on the amalgamation? Is there a heritage benefit? Well, we've been amalgamating some properties where they're designed as.
Yeah, I mean that was again would be one of those positive factors that we couldn't. We accepted officers' views that there was no grounds to make a change to the local plan based on those, and we currently have a position where if a member wants to call in a particular case, the planning committee can decide it. It's obviously for the lead member and for the director to work out in the future when there isn't a committee how the automatic right for that to come to committee, whether it's significant enough to make it into a tier B, whatever it's called, and come to a committee decision to override local policy.
I think Tim's got. Do you want to have another?
I have just one final one. And with hotels, do we have a way of encouraging hotels that are not used or not affected to encourage them to actually turn a residential?
Yeah.
Are we actually helping facilitating that?
It's called the free market.
Yeah. That's actually it was very
It
interesting
is,
because
but just
we
encourage.
debated that point. We say, is policy getting in the way of bad hotels
Exactly.
getting themselves out of being hotels?
Yes.
And the answer was, we looked at the evidence and talked to officers about it, is that where there were bad hotels, they could come up with very good arguments that would mean that they should turn it into something else, and there was no evidence of any hotels being stopped from turning it into something else. So actually, it looked like the policy and the way that officers were working it exactly fitted that criteria.
Okay, so that's fantastic.
So the policy wasn't in the way
Okay.
of bad hotels turning into good accommodation.
Thank you, Chair.
I just have one question on HL4 housing sizing and standards. It says there is a higher need identified for smaller homes of 1 to 2 bedroom flats in the private sector. And obviously for the social housing, it's the reverse, where we need bigger houses because the waiting is so very, very long. Was the housing size, what was the discussion around housing sizes for social housing? And do you indeed feel that the current local plan is strong enough on that one?
I remember we did debate that as well, and it came about because people felt that even though the policy was driven and the local plan was created in terms of maximising the number of units created because of the housing need, it came up to this. I think maybe you may have been you didn't hear it, but certainly one of the debates we had around this table is what about quality of the housing rather than just cramming in the maximum number of units. And it came back to, and I remember this as well, it came back to what is the evidence that we can reduce the number of units that we are providing as a local authority in order to create more family-sized units. And the evidence base is is it called SHAMAR or something? How do you say it?
Yeah, it's local housing needs assessment.
Yeah.
LHA.
That big. Was not going to give us the evidence that would enable us to create those extra-sized units, and therefore we felt that there weren't grounds to push that one, because we'd be going completely against the number delivery, which during the course of working group got a lot worse. The number of units we have to create is far higher now than when you started the working group.
Any other questions? Sorry, I'll follow up on that. Didn't the current waiting list for social housing, where there is a stress on, where there's a particular stress on larger size families, could that not be considered as a push for that requirement?
I don't remember exactly that point coming up, to be honest. We had only 4 meetings, I think, in total, so it was just who the members were around the table and what could ask officers. So that would be interesting to get the answer to. And in fact, doesn't stop that question from being asked at future committees to officers for this report meeting.
So ask Mary if she has any questions to the working group. She does not. Prior, you were came to the residents.
All I can say is that we welcome this report. We hope that we will be fully involved in the review of mixed use and mansards.
Much so that's a welcome from the single member of the public present, who's hopefully representative of the population.
It did not adopt. It did not decide to take a whole lot of things forward.
So the question to the committee tonight is: do we wish to formally adopt this report? Committee's report. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Yes. We are. The
most popular thing we've ever done.
Okay. So the committee has formally adopted the report.
And I'd like to thank officers for putting up with all the hard questions that we did ask, and for the governance team for running it so well. It's the best one I've worked on for many years.
Very good. Well, that's a high commendation for such an experienced councillor. I'd like to say thank you to you, Sam. Thank you to your committee members, Dory and Toby in absence, and to James, who no doubt behind the scenes pulled everything together.
With Tommy's help.
With Tommy secretarying away. So very good effort all round, and thanks very much indeed. So we have formally adopted the report. One final action though is we've given out, in adopting the report, we've given ourselves an action. Is we have to decide now whether we are going to accept that action. It's called binding our successors. But it is on TR8 on car parking, which is the Environment Select Committee reviews data on parking use and trends to monitor the implementation of policy. So my proposal is that we do accept that recommendation for our successors at the beginning of 2027 to have a look at, because I think there's actually something really useful in that one. We've got some more data back over the course of this year on parking, and I think we can add some value on it. At least our successors in this committee can add some value on that. So I think the proposal was accepted, binding the successors to those who are definitely not going to be here. And,
That's not a good idea, though.
So we've adopted the recommendation for ourselves. that brings us to the end of that paper. A8, does anybody have any comments on the work programme report at the end? I'm assuming no. So that brings us to the conclusion of the meeting. Thank you all very much for the questions. Thank you to officers reading out the papers, and Sabina, thank you very much for attending and adding value as our member of the public tonight. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you. Next year.
Roger.
Yeah.
We can.